Chapter 101, Epilogue, Hostel. Peach had never been to Diamond City before this month. Well, she had been here on official capacity, yes, but that was hardly visiting, now was it? Official visits as the royal ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom were hardly even visits to begin with, they were more comparable to a layover at an airport than anything else. So in effect, Peach loved being able to truly explore somewhere. It had been several months since the end of the Battle of Dark Land. The world had once more turned to peace, and so Peach used this opportunity to fulfill her dream of seeing the world with fresh eyes, not those of a regal princess with responsibilities and geopolitics, but those of a woman with a full life ahead of her. Right now she was staying at a hostel, in a cramped bunk bedroom with 6 other co-eds, and was doing her laundry, a mix of t-shirts and boxer shorts and long pants for the cold days. The hostel had free washing machines, but it definitely did not have any dryers, and she was having to hang everything up on the clothesline out on the balcony. West Side neighborhood in Diamond City was nice. It was quiet at this time of day, other than the constant influx of cars and traffic, but after a few weeks here, you could usually tune out the vehicular noise. The occasional gunshot or two at night was barely enough to wake her at this point. A young couple named Holly, always dressed up in the nicest sundresses and prettiest hats, entered the bunk bedroom and began rummaging through her locker. Everyone in this hostel was pretty much like Peach, young wanderers trying to explore what they could while they could. Peach, of course, was already married and had 8 step-siblings of her own. So she wasn't quite as much of a free spirit as she would have liked. But she had been given her wife's blessing to go on this journey, and through 16 different towns and cities, she had done exactly that. She wasn't sure if she'd be able to pull it off, as famous as she was and as much as her face was plastered on posters and billboards and TV screens all across the planet all her life. But all it took was a radical haircut. She started with a bob and ended up with a buzz cut, and some baggy clothing, and she wasn't only unrecognizable as Peach Toadstool, she was constantly being asked if she was a boy, as well. Peach sort of understood the way Bowsette might have felt when she first discovered what it was like to present herself as a different gender. For everyone to see you, to treat you differently in those subtle ways people probably didn't even notice about themselves. The more androgynous she had gotten, the more people would ignore her. No more catcalls on the street, no more courtesy door holding, no more being able to chat up random girls on the street without attracting rude glares. It wasn't good or bad, but the fact it was different was pretty interesting. Peach had toyed with this for a while. When she was in Glitzville she had decided to go by Edward, and it honestly felt like a pretty nice fit while she was in such a rough and tumble place. She had to work on keeping her voice from being too shrill, but nobody seemed to mind too much. In the end, she decided she was going to stick with Peach, and eventually she'd grow her hair back out. She had no problem with her femininity. Girlishness and womanhood basically defined her personhood, after all, and she had made a promise to her wife to become a loving mother once she had returned to her side.
"Hey, have you seen my bonnet?"
Holly asked.
"I can't find it anywhere around here." "Yeah, it's in the common room, last I saw,"
Peach answered.
"You were wearing it when we all had that drinking night last weekend." "Whoa, man, that was crazy, wasn't it?"
Holly giggled.
"Thanks, Edward." "You're welcome."
But maybe it was something about the spirit of adventure or the intentional isolation, but Peach thought she was going to keep going by Edward for a little bit longer. Even in Diamond City, it was a nice fit. She wondered what Bowsette would react like if she saw her like this, dressed up like a guy, calling herself Edward, socializing with a bunch of college-age travelers like just another brother. She'd probably love her just the same. Because it didn't matter what was on the outside if you truly loved someone. What mattered was the content of their heart, and nobody was ever going to take that away. Also, that sounded pretty sappy, didn't it? She looked at her clothes up on the clothesline. Almost entirely summer outfits, the kind that men and women could pull off just about as easily as one another during the hotter parts of the year. But as the season was winding down and the temperature was getting chillier, she knew she might have to get a new wardrobe. And she had been seeing so many adorable autumn outfits in downtown Diamond City recently. That was going to be a problem if she stayed in Diamond City, where everyone knew her as the quiet young man Edward. As Holly started to leave the room, though, Peach stopped her.
"Hey, Holly."
"Yes."
"What would you do if I started wearing dresses around the hostel?"
Holly blushed and stammered for a moment before saying,
"Well, if that's what you want to do, Edward, I'd probably be a bit uncomfortable for a couple days, but that's because I'm not good enough, more than anything. After I got past that, I'd try to support you in whatever you want to do. Because that's what friends do."
"Aw, thanks."
Peach had to hold her laughter in as much as she could before Holly finally closed the door behind her. She was so glad to be taking this journey. End of chapter. Chapter 102, Epilogue, The Future of the Continent. Epilogue, The Future of the Continent. The next few years would be hardly memorable for the continent, a fortunate and well-deserved turn after all the turmoil of the years prior. The Mushroom Kingdom, having broken up fully into a few dozen smaller states, had seen very little conflict between the new neighbors. Shiver region and the Dry Republic in particular had both prospered as major tourist hubs and energy suppliers, giving their countries new economic boosts that had propelled them to worldwide status. Mushroom World and its Federation of 8 Kings had mutually decided to part ways, each of them ruling as separate entities entirely. It made traveling between each region more difficult, but on the whole, the entire eastern portion of the continent prospered. Bowsette, in the end, decided to attempt something similar to Peach's national breakup, but on a much smaller scale. After Dark Land was rebuilt from the war and chaos it had endured, she drafted the nation's very first constitution, effectively dividing each region, each vassal state and prefecture within Bowsette's kingdom into an autonomous nation of its own. Bowsette relinquished her absolute rule, conferring to a new council made up of each of the individual rulers of each territory within Dark Land who made most all decisions in the region. Boom Boom, in his immense popularity, was elected the council's first prime minister, and with his leadership the council had improved life in Dark Land immensely over the course of its first few years. Peach roamed the earth, just as she said, mostly cutting off contact with anyone she had previously associated with in order to find herself in an independent life. To better blend in as an unassuming commoner, she cut her hair short and wore nothing but the outdoorsy clothes she had taken with her to prepare to hike across the continent. The two weren't in constant contact, but Peach and Bowsette traded letters and other items when they could. Just this week Bowsette got another postcard from her wife, and attached was a photo where Peach was posing with many friends she had met recently. She was staying somewhere in the southern Chai Kingdom in Sarasa Land, near Bowsette's vacation castle in Hanafuda. It was a beautiful place and Bowsette was really glad to see Peach as happy as she looked. She also sported a very nice short haircut. It looked so fitting on her that Bowsette kind of hoped she would keep it for good. Bowsette thought about heading over there to see if they could meet up, but she was satisfied with Peach's monthly postcards. Knowing her wife was happy was good enough for now. The Koopalings had fallen back into their squabbling ways, but that was only natural for a bunch of young brats like themselves. Iggy, now done with his stint as the conqueror, had shifted to being the bossy leader of the Koopalings, undermining Morton Jr. and Ludwig's attempts to do the same. Wendy had cozied up to her mother in an attempt to curry her favor, but it was more annoying than endearing. She still had no idea which of the Koopalings would eventually become her chosen successor for the throne, even if it had very little power left in it other than a symbolic role, but she was glad that they weren't trying to kill each other over it anymore. On the brighter side, Morton Jr. had been spending a lot more time with a female Koopa he had met at Koopa University this semester. He was softening up considerably, and Bowsette really liked the girl. She was very nice. If Bowsette got a grandchild this soon, she would be utterly ecstatic. As big as their family currently was, she wanted it to get even bigger. All of the people Morton Koopa had turned to stone had slowly been coming back to life now that Morton's very existence had been eradicated. Even those turned to stone during his original rule over Dark Land had been coming back, some of them hundreds of years old and completely unaware of the changes that had occurred since they had been frozen. Bowsette was waiting for the day when one of her older siblings emerged from deep underground and made some flimsy claim for the throne, but it still hadn't happened. Considering that most of her siblings had been used in Morton's horrid Dreadlord experiments, she wasn't sure if that would ever really happen after all. The continent was truly at peace for the first time in probably eons. There were no more wars or skirmishes. Bowsette still hadn't done anything to antagonize Mario since he got back from Saturn after a year-long adventure, and the world seemed like it was on the verge of entering a new age altogether. One where species and ethnicity was important, but never a stepping stone to prejudice and sectarian violence. One where the kings and queens of countries wouldn't send their citizens to die in pointless conflict. One where a Koopa king could become a Koopa queen and still embrace all the power that came with that. It wouldn't last. Nothing like this ever did, of course. But for now, this was the perfect time to be alive, and Bowsette enjoyed every moment of it. End of chapter. Chapter 103, Epilogue, Koopaling Scuffle. Epilogue, The Lives of the Generals. Iggy Koopa lunged at Ludwig and punched him in the face. The two scrapped, throwing fists at each other and pushing each other aside, but no dirty tricks were used. This was a fair fight. Ludwig pinned Iggy to the ground and laughed.
Kaka, what are you gonna do now? This!
Iggy shouted. With the full weight of his growing muscles, he pushed Ludwig off of him and then kicked him in the stomach. As he stumbled backwards, Iggy headbutted him in the face and knocked him to the ground. The other Koopalings broke out into a cheer, except for Morton Jr.'s wife Holly, who only politely clapped for some reason. She still hadn't been fully inducted into the clan, probably.
With this victory, I take control of the Koopalings as its ultimate leader,
Iggy said.
I am no longer a Koopaling. I am a royal Koopa. I have come of age.
The cheering stopped and was replaced by groans and moans. Even the youngest of the bunch, Bowser Jr., shook his head.
Dude, you don't get to decide that stuff yourself,
he said.
Only Mama Bowsette gets to say who's come of age. She still hasn't even told me I'm a royal Koopa,
whined Morton Jr.
Well, when I unveil her my new magnetic propulsion castle design, she's going to promote me for sure,
Iggy proclaimed.
We can have a whole airship fleet and floating castle deployed and launched to a new country in just 2 hours. We'll be invincible. Did you Mario-proof it yet?
Wendy asked.
She ain't accepting any new designs that ain't been Mario-proofed. Well, I'm still working on it.
Iggy had been one of the heroes of the war, one of the 7 generals of the Grand Unity Army. But he knew he still had a long way to go before he could become a true royal Koopa and take his rightful place as the leader of a dark land domain. But he was going to keep trying for sure, because now that he had tasted what power and leadership were really like, he needed to get the full experience. It was in his very blood. End of chapter. Chapter 104, Epilogue, The Good Doctor.
I've ironed out the defects, absolutely,
Dr. Krieger said as he chatted with Goomboss Jr. on the phone.
Yes, of course I can give you a sample unit. But you've got to act fast if you want a full order. My next batch is going to sell out by the end of the week.
Yes, so maybe Dr. Krieger's machines and robots lifted from Smithy Gang's extra-dimensional factories had not been fully tested in combat, and maybe they had resulted in the death of one of the Grand Unity Army's generals and hadn't accomplished much beyond the first wave of the attack. It didn't matter though, because that was all a practice run, a demo to show off Krieger's new research and development division, staffed solely by himself and his grandchild, but buyers didn't need to know about that just now. The version 2 models for all these robots had gone much more smoothly in production. Krieger had even recreated the famous Axum Rangers that had been destroyed by Mario and his allies all those years ago. Naturally, every country was investing in his product. And now that there were many dozen more countries than there were just a few years earlier, that meant business was absolutely booming. Krieger stepped aside and allowed his robot Mike to take over for the rest of the phone calls of the day. He was very good at customer service, as robots were able to listen to angry rants without feeling any emotional connection because that was their nature, rather than having to be psychologically desensitized to it like poor organic beings. He entered the break room to grab a cup of tea from his own vending machine, and noticed his grandchild reading a book with 2 shirtless men on the cover standing back to back and holding hands. Inspired by Bowsette's grandstand against her biological father and growing reputation as a heroic legend, Penny had told Krieger to start calling them by the name Pen, and was wearing more loose clothing as they tried to figure out their own feelings on their identity. Krieger was glad that they were working this out, even if it likely hurt their dreams of becoming a pop star one day. But Penn had a new dream, it seemed, to use technology to create the ultimate combat suit, and to become a famous martial artist using the machinery. Krieger thought his own dream of making a lot of money and inventing new things was fine, and a path that his grandchild would be well suited for. But he believed in his grandchild as much as he could. Aside from Penn, though, Krieger's life was on the up and up in almost every respect. After over 100 years of life, he had finally begun to have a real success. He ventured out into the test factory, where prototype models of his robot soldiers were being built. It was glorious. The voice inside his head gave a hearty laugh.
You're doing excellently. You're doing exactly what I wish. Of course,
Dr. Krieger said aloud.
The Smithy gang must rise again, and this is the way to achieve that. Together, we're accomplishing the impossible,
the voice said.
Yes. Just you and me. Rather. Just me and me.
Dr. Krieger laughed. End of chapter. Chapter 105, Epilogue, Sunbathing. Epilogue, Sunbathing. Boom Boom and Pom Pom laid out on their sunbathing benches and basked in the sun for the 2 hours it would be out today before it sunk below the clouds of volcanic ash and nightfall came upon them.
Boom Boom wonders something. Yeah, honey?
Pom Pom asked.
What if Boom Boom had never told Bowsette about that fake invasion everyone was planning for her? What if Boom Boom had let her keep being the miserable King Koopa that she was? Then the world would be a much unhappier place,
Pom Pom said.
You're not going to start blaming yourself for all the bad stuff that happened because of Bowser becoming Bowsette, right? Because that's a total lame-o move. You're right,
Boom Boom said.
Boom Boom was totally going to start doing that.
He laughed softly.
Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore, because you're doing a great job as Prime Minister. Everybody loves you. You could probably call yourself king and everyone'd just accept it. I'd accept it for sure. Boom Boom knows you're only saying that because you want to call yourself queen. You're not wrong,
she said with a laugh. Still, even if Boom Boom wasn't king in title, he was effectively the ruler of all of Darkland. He really liked having that power. This was the life. Though he would later learn that he had forgot to put on sunscreen and his body, head to shell, was covered in sunburns. End of chapter. Chapter 106, Epilogue, Down the Warp Pipe. Goombella hopped up on a warp pipe and furrowed her brows.
Okay, you two,
she shouted.
This is the entrance to the Minus Zone. It's a realm adjacent to Subcon whose properties are unknown, unstudied, and uncharted. We will be some of the first people to ever enter this place, and whatever happens, we're going to be at an incredible risk. Are you still up for it?
Luigi was starting to shiver at the thought of incredible danger with no expectations as to what might lie before them.
Of course we are.
King/Princess Boo-ette said. Right now he was in King Boo form, but he had decided that he was going to remain as Boo-ette for the majority of their excursion into the Minus Zone. Luigi preferred that form and he enjoyed making him happy, even if all it usually took was a heinous chuckle to scare him into complete paralysis. He chuckled,
Yuck 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 yuck.
And just like that Luigi jumped. It really was that easy.
Well, once we enter, there's no going back until we've mapped out the whole place. So, any last hesitations? Anyone forgot a change of overalls? No, we're fine,
Luigi said.
Then let's go.
At this, King Boo put on the super crown and became Boo-ette. She stuck out her overlong tongue and licked Luigi across the face, which once again made him jump, and then hopped into the warp pipe. Merry Christmas! I'm still in the process of getting moved to Japan all of a sudden, but I'll be posting a few more epilogue chapters to wrap things up if you still want it. I got 7 or 8 more in the works trying to tie up some of the loose ends, as long as you're patient. Or impatient, too. You can pester me all you want as long as you do it by posting more reviews lol. End of chapter. Chapter 107, Epilogue, The People at Peace. Toadsworth looked out his jail cell, hoping desperately to catch a glimpse of the light. He did not. He had been in this cell for years, some amount of years. He had mostly lost track of a sense of time, being trapped in here with no ability to speak to the outside world or even learn what was going on. Such was the life of someone who had plotted a coup against the government. The former chancellor sat in the cell across from him. He was adamant about his innocence at first, but by this point he no longer spoke. He wandered through this tiny life like a ghost waiting to form. Toadsworth was close to doing the same. A guard came up and handed him his second meal for the day. It was lukewarm toad soup, as it was 5 days out of the week. The only way Toadsworth could mark the weekends was when the food quality noticeably decreased because the cooks had left. It was almost always a bland meal for breakfast and a mistake for dinner, on those days.
"Hey, did you hear the news?"
the guard asked.
"What?"
The guard burst into laughter.
"No, you didn't."
That was typical, too. Toadsworth did wonder what was going to happen to the Mushroom Kingdom in the future. Surely the feckless Princess Peach would be overthrown by the people soon enough. When that happened, surely he and the others would be freed from their illegal captivity. But it still hadn't happened yet. In fact, it seemed that they had caught Game Guy, or at least shut down his legitimate business ventures. A few months ago there was an influx of Shy Guy inmates entering this floor, and while none of them had talked, they were very often summoned upstairs for questioning. Toadsworth never got questioned anymore. He almost missed it. He held out hope. Hope that the great toads that joined him and the Chancellor would rise up again against their disgusting Koopa-loving oppressor, as hope that one day he would be able to see his granddaughter's graduation and embrace them in his arms. That would never happen. Just a few weeks later, the government of Shroom City extradited him on charges of conspiracy to commit treason, and sentenced him to a life in permanent exile on Cold Mountain. Just like he had proposed about Bowser all those years ago. It was indeed cold. End of chapter. Chapter 108, Epilogue, Love.
Bowsette. Peach.
They kissed. They did a lot more than kiss. The two were finally reunited. And that was all that needed to be said. End of chapter. Chapter 109, Epilogue, Bag It and Grab It. Nabbit was excited to get the mail. Loved getting the mail. Parakari always delivered it right now. This moment. 10:15 in the morning. Never late. Except when he had a special delivery elsewhere. Or when he had a special delivery here. It really depended. Other than that, he was never late. Today he definitely wouldn't be late. There was a very special delivery coming. He knew it. Yep. There was Parakari. Hey guy. What's up? How's it hanging? Got anything for Nabbit?
Hey guy. How's it hanging? Got anything for me? Yes, I do.
Parakari shouted with glee. Not too much glee. Not too much non-glee. The perfect, professional amount of glee. He handed a letter to Nabbit. Pretty small. Not a large envelope like he hoped. That was okay. He didn't need anything else. Envelopes were fine. Cool, in fact. But they weren't the best ever. Nabbit was content with a letter. Definitely. Parakari flew off. Nabbit had already opened the letter and begun reading. He read as fast as he ran. Not true. Nabbit was a pretty good reader though.
Come meet me,
the letter read.
You know where. You know when. We're beginning our master plan immediately. Oh boy!
Nabbit shouted. Without a second thought to his wife and kids, he dashed off in pursuit of his destination. That was all he ever did in his life. His family would be fine too. They liked nabbing, grabbing, bagging. Not bragging, but his family was pretty good stuff too. They all were. That's why Nabbit was summoned. He was the best at what he did. And what he did was pretty nice. End of chapter. Chapter 110, Epilogue, A Scientist Amok. Mad Science Stein had escaped with barely a glance in his direction. Dark Land had become incredibly hostile to his presence, and yet he was able to simply walk out in the midst of the chaos and war around him. Morton Koopa's resurrection was a scientific failure, that was for sure. When he and Kamek had decided to revive him, they thought it would be a temporary measure to gain peace and control. But once Morton's powers began to emerge once again, Mad Science Stein realized just what a discovery they had found, in that resurrecting the bones of the undead were simply not an effective way of controlling them. You would think so. But it looks like reanimated husks retained too much of their personality. No, Science Stein had a new experiment in mind. A scarred, beaten young man sitting on an operating table before him was the subject of such an experiment. He was a living cloud, made from the magical energies of the wind having taken permanent physical form. And he was the perfect recruit.
All I want to do is kill that monster,
King Mallow of Nimbus Land said. At this point, Nimbus Land had completely fallen to ruin. With its sole remaining ruler secluding himself from society and not even returning to his home for over 2 years now, most of its citizens had emigrated, finding a new home with Lord Huff and Puff or adopting the urban lifestyle in Shroom City. Those few who remained had taken over and formed their own agrarian-based society, harvesting the rain from clouds to fuel their subsistence farms. It was admirable, really, what those people were doing. But Mad Science Stein wasn't one to play on morals. He was a man of science and magic. Using Mallow was simply a means to an end, and that end was research. After Dr. Krieger had so gallantly rushed his new robot armies into production, Science Stein had to keep up with innovations of his own, or else he would lose out completely.
This experiment, if it succeeds, will make you more than powerful enough to destroy Bowsette,
he said.
This is exactly the experiment I was going to use on her had I captured her rather than Morton. In a better world. There is no better world,
Mallow said, grimacing and letting his scars light up with electricity.
There is only the doom and gloom of this wretched planet Earth. Heh. Well, it seems that you are ready to commence.
Science Stein said.
Only if this makes me into a better warrior,
he said.
If my calculations are right, you will be no warrior,
he said.
You'll be a god.
Mad Science Stein flipped the switch, and the machine activated. End of chapter. Chapter 111, Epilogue, Club 64. Lucky Lulu floated back over to her wife carrying 2 tasty tonics, one for her, and another also for her. Kupiku couldn't drink on account of her pregnancy, of course. So Lucky Lulu was taking upon her the heavy burden of drinking for 2. She set the drinks on the table and Kupiku shook her head in faint disapproval.
You're really making me jealous. It's a celebration. You have to drink,
said Lucky Lulu.
We won. I don't know if this counts as winning, Lulu.
The bartender stepped out from behind the bar and up to the projector screen.
Okay, hello everyone,
he said.
Welcome to Club 64. Everyone knows why we're here today, and that's to celebrate the anniversary of the end of the war. But more importantly, we've finally found the rough cut of Zip Toad's last movie.
The entire bar went into a cheer, especially Kupi-Ku, whose interest in obscure movies was unparalleled.
This movie was shot several years ago, during the midst of the Mushroom Kingdom coup, but it was thought to have been destroyed after Zip Toad abandoned the project and fled to Down Under Land. But thanks to some very helpful, very anonymous sources,
the bartender winked in the direction of the master poet,
we've finally obtained a copy. One scene was shot in this bar, and everyone will get a free round on the house once we get to that point in the film. Are you all ready for Toad of a Nation?
Another cheer. The bartender flipped on the projector and the movie started to play, the very first scene showing a nearly naked Zip Toad making out with a lady toad that he was also undressing. The movie was absolutely terrible, one of the worst things anyone in the bar had ever seen, an utterly baffling propaganda project that had no self-awareness in at least 15 scenes where Zip Toad took his shirt off. It was also one of the funniest movies of all time. An instant classic. And in everything of the violence against the Koopas in the former Mushroom Kingdom, the uproar between species that escalated into what was nearly a full-fledged civil war, and the embers of tension that still burned between them to this day. Toad of a Nation was probably the best healing that Toad Town had ever gotten. End of chapter. Chapter 112, Epilogue, The Koopas and the Toadstools.
It's still hard to forgive her for everything she did,
Bowsette said.
She left me literally to go find herself. But really, she had left me much earlier emotionally. I should never have let her go. But then you would have never found me. That's true, I know. I'm just overthinking things as usual, hey. You wouldn't be Bowsette if you didn't.
Peach and Bowsette kissed, and then kissed again. And then they would have kept going from there, but they were in the middle of the Bananan ruins and 12 of her family were among them. The Koopas and the Toadstools united as one.
You know, I kinda went out and found myself too, back after the war ended,
Peach said.
Does that make me as bad as Claudia? I'd say that it's not a good comparison when you didn't have a bunch of small children waiting on you to return. My kids are all about grown up. Well, they were.
Peach laughed.
They definitely were.
By saying
the Koopas and Toadstools united as one,
that wasn't just talking about the wife and the 8 Koopalings. That was including the hatchling Fallon, who scurried around the others with her head still partially stuck in her shell, as well as Getty, the infant that Wendy was currently carrying on her back. Morton Jr.'s wife Holly was there too along with their own child, Morton 3. That wasn't including, however, the other child currently inside of Peach. She knew what she said when she wanted her family to get even bigger, but this was a bit crazy. Bowsette had finally found out what enduring motherhood was like, after so many decades of ignoring the actual process of it because it icked her out. It had good reason to ick her out, of course. It had been a very tough 3 months of gestation with massive hormonal changes and a literal living thing growing inside of her, but then when she gave birth. Man, she really didn't want to go into detail about that. It was something straight out of a Lovecraft novel. She had absolutely no idea how Peach had gone through her first pregnancy for a whole 9 months. If it weren't for that deal they made to have 2 kids each, she would be absolutely done with this whole child-rearing business. No more, never. Though she loved her children so much. At this moment, Claudia Koopa jumped to the ground, readying herself in an attack pose for just one moment before she realized what people were here to see her.
"Oh my Brighton!"
She teared up almost immediately before running up to her kids and trying to give them a hug. For the most part, they rebuffed, only Lemmy, who was always a strange one, accepted the hug in full and returned it. When she realized that her own 6 children had spurned her, she fully broke out in sobs, but surely she knew this was coming. It was going to take some time before they could really adjust to living with the mother that had abandoned them so many years ago.
"It's nice to see all of you again," she said. "Wendy, you're a mother already?"
Wendy scoffed.
"No way," she said. "I ain't a lover, I'm a fighter." "Oh, That's mine, sorry,"
Peach said.
"Wendy's a good caretaker, though. You have some very nice children."
Peach had lived abroad for over 2 years, traveling the world and seeing the sights she had never been able to encounter in her time as a famous royal, and then she had settled back into a life with her wife just like she promised. It was still a growing experience, learning to live with a family of 8 children that were mostly fully matured as well as raising 2 young children of her own DNA.
"And Iggy, you changed your hair. Green's in this season,"
he said. He said this with way too proud of a smile. Bowsette, on the other hand, was noticing the immense family resemblance between Claudia and her children with this woman. In fact, Ludwig was extremely similar to his other mother. They were almost one in the same, to a nearly disconcerting degree.
"I want to do something,"
Ludwig said, almost on cue.
Yes. "I want to duel you,"
he said.
"I want to see how far I've come." Ka. You really think you're ready for that?" "I know I am. Because I'm going to prove myself as a royal Koopa for sure."
Ludwig jumped at his mother and attacked her, but was fended off as she shot out the spikes from her shell. As expected, there was a battle within minutes of their meeting Claudia. This was almost sure to be the bulk of their vacation here in the Bananan Ruins. And both Peach and Bowsette were fine with this. They were fulfilling their promise to her, and if this meant that the Koopalings would finally stop squabbling and team up against this woman, then that would be a positive enough outcome. It had been a few years since Morton Koopa had finally been destroyed, and yet there still hadn't been any sort of major war or conflict break out. Even Mario himself had been a bit low on adventuring lately. Sometime soon it was going to be boring, but for now, as long as Peach and Bowsette could raise their children without fear of harm or the inevitability of kidnapping by an assortment of villains, then that was a good price to pay. The other Koopalings joined in the duel against Claudia, and the fight turned into madness with shells spinning and bouncing and spikes shooting everywhere. The fact that this was the most exciting thing to happen to the Toadstool and Koopa families in years was a really good sign of things to come. Bowsette and Peach kissed again for good measure. End of chapter. Chapter 113. The island was stocked up with weapons and supplies and most importantly explosives. An entire army of piranha plants, most of them imported after the destruction of Petey Piranha, filled the grasslands. And inside the same makeshift castle he always made his stay in, was none other than the great Waluigi himself. Nabbit dashed into the castle and bowed before Waluigi.
"I'm here, what's up, what's happening, do you have anything for me?"
Waluigi eyed the rabbit and then focused his gaze forwards, away from him.
"Report. Is the world still at peace?" Yep. Nothing bad happening. Not much conflict. Well, World 4 and World 6 are in a trade war. Not a real war. Just tariffs and stuff. Hurting their economies though. We can't do much about that. Sad. Wahahaha hey 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 hey. Good.
Waluigi clasped his fingers together.
It will finally be time to make my mark on the planet Earth, then. Yeah, definitely,
Nabbit said.
I'm rooting for you. I've been rooting for you. I really believe in you. Pretty obvious when you think about it.
Waluigi ignored him.
It is almost time for my secret operation to commence. Codename, Purple Strike. Waha. Waha, yeah. Pretty cool stuff. Really excited. When are we starting it? Is the purple named after you or me? Since we're both purple.
Once again, Waluigi didn't reply. He knew how to avoid getting trapped in Nabbit conversations. The last thing he wanted to do was get in a 3-hour back and forth that went nowhere. The answer to that question of when, though? Waluigi knew it well. It was tomorrow. He was no longer holding back. The world would be his.
Wahahahahahaha. Wahaha.
A/N, and there you have it, the end of the epilogue chapters for The Glory of Bowsette. Compared to the 2 weeks it took to write and post the main story, the epilogue chapters have come at a bit of an excruciatingly slow rate, but I'm hoping that any fans of the story can now rest satisfied that the story has drawn to a firm and conclusive end. What's that you say? The chapter right above me is saying the exact opposite? Well, that dastardly Waluigi does seem to get into the way of people's plans sometimes. I can say definitively though that there is no Glory of Bowsette sequel planned at this time. Right now, I'm actively publishing Atlanta, Stories from the Retro Future, which, as I have mentioned before, if you liked Bowsette's silly action-packed fun, Atlanta is definitely up your alley, and I'm about to start work on another novel fairly soon. Along with finally having a full-time job in Japan, this means the prospect of more Bowsette is pretty unlikely in the near future. I've thought about sending a call out for a co-writer who might want to forge ahead with me on the future of the Mushroom World, but I'm not sure if there is much of anyone who would be interested in co-writing a follow-up story in the first place. So, at least for the moment, the end you get here is the end for good. We can rest easy knowing that Bowsette, Peach, and most family and friends are safe and sound and are unaware of the fact that Waluigi is apparently about to do some nefarious evil stuff to ruin all their lives. And that's probably a good ending to leave off on. If you are interested in potentially co-authoring To Glory to Bowsette someday, feel free to send a message over, also. End of chapter. Chapter 114, Super Bowsette Maker. Super Bowsette Maker. By Thedud 3445. Bowsette kicked up dirt with her claws and extended her wings. She spun around, knocking the dirt around and creating a mini sandstorm around her.
Ka.
She cackled. She flew up into the sky, and just as she entered in front of the sun, the scene went dark, for just a split second, and a flash of lightning scorched across the horizon behind her. It was a perfectly sunny day. She slowly descended, landed gently on her 2 claws, and laughed again.
I'm back, baby!
She shouted.
What the heck are you doing?
Peach asked. Peach, former Princess Toadstool, had been married to Bowsette for over 5 years now. They had had 4 kids together. And yet, it was clear that being with Bowsette was still something of a learning process. Bowsette didn't mind, though. She knew she was a complex person to be around. If you couldn't handle her at her worst, you didn't deserve her at her best.
I'm cackling, she answered. Yes, but, why are you cackling? I've got a new plan, she said. I'm going to be a villain again. Ka 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 ka. I can see that,
Peach said.
You're doing the laugh again. The one the kids always try and imitate. Oh, you know it's just Fallon. The other ones have hardly even learned to speak. And yet they're still laughing just like you. I know it's not genetic. Well, anyway,
Bowsette began.
I'm going to be a villain again and nobody can stop me. Because I've got the perfect plan that nobody can wreck. Global domination will be mine.
Peach stared at her.
Not that I'll, actually take over the world or anything. It'll just be the opportunity for me to do it. Which I will turn down. So what's the first step of your master plan?
Peach asked.
Crashing the Shroom City Mario Maker contest, with no survivors.
Bowsette shouted.
What? You were invited to that, Bowsette, so you can't actually crash it,
Peach said.
I feel like I'm nagging you a lot today, but you're acting extra dumb. That may be true, but I have villainy to pull off, and being a smart villain is usually a surefire way to get caught. The best way to do evil things, in my opinion, is to act with absolute erratic no-plan action, so that you can take everyone off guard, including yourself. If you make it up as you go, and you're really good at it, then nobody else has time to react. Is that what you did back when you conquered the Mushroom Kingdom 5 years ago? Exactly. My end goal was all I had. I gathered whatever power-ups I could think of, and I just went on an idiotic rampage. You're a dumbass,
Peach said.
And I love you so much.
They kissed.
So, you wanna help me crash the party?
Bowsette asked.
Yeah, why not? I haven't been a villain since that time the Shadow Queen took over my body, and that barely counts. I love it when you dress like that. You are my big boob goth GF. You want me to do it again? I still have the outfit at home. Somewhere. Only if you make love to me in it after we conquer the world. No, and no. Oh well.
They went back to Peach's castle and got ready for the big evening. They were going to take over the world have the option of taking over the world and declined to actually do it. Tonight was the big night for Shroom City. After the Mushroom Kingdom collapsed about 4.5 years ago, its constituencies and vassal states began striking it out on their own. Some formed alliances and created their own kingdoms. The 8 eastern kings with whom House Toadstool were allied for centuries remained united, other than the land of World 3, which seceded and renamed itself Water World. Its thriving casino business kept it alive ever since. States like the Dry Republic and Down Under Land became more prosperous than ever, with control of their own destinies and full ability to monitor their resources. Shiver City became the Shiver Empire, conquering most of the territory in the northeast of the continent, but it had been in economic recession ever since, expanding too big into areas with few viable resources. However, what was hardest hit by the breakup of the Mushroom Kingdom were the lands traditionally controlled by the Toads. Many in the Toad political sphere wanted to create their own ethno-state that purged all non-Toads and forced them to move elsewhere. However, this didn't pan out due to the forceful and peaceful uprising by future Nobel Prize winner Kupi Ku, who advocated for the rights of Koopas, Goombas, Wigglers, and all other peoples within the Toad majority lands. The unrest lasted for a while, and there was some street violence and clashes between Toad supremacists and those opposed to them. But, in the end, there came 3 separate nations, each of which had its own role to play in the region. First, there was Fungi-Stein, a rural farming country led by the elders of Goomba village and the nearby Toad town. Peach's castle was contained in Fungi-Stein, but was considered its own sovereign nation due to the outsized influence that Peach Toadstool and her wife Bowsette, Lordess of Darkness, Creator of Pain, still had on everyday life. Second, there was the Unity Republic, which consisted of the most concentrated Toad population of the former Mushroom Kingdom. This small territory contained towns like Decalburg, Toad Harbor, and areas like Pasta Land and Western Land. This was the biggest nation, but the least populous, with large swathes of untamed wilderness. Third, and the largest, was Shroom City, the biggest city in the world and now its own city-state nation. Shroom City was also home to 5 completely separate biomes, thanks to its expansive nature, and was so diverse that it was able to become independent very quickly. However, its economy had been very, very bad. With 1 million new peace treaties to fill out and all its trade deals lost, Shroom City entered a dark age of economic stagnation that led to a mass exodus, an odyssey if you will, of people to more ripe pastures. Diamond City, New Donk City, even Yoshi's Island all saw influxes of immigrants during the past few years. Now, Shroom City is still the biggest city in the world, but it would not remain so unless it acted. And, with Mario's help, it would. Luigi and King Boo were off for their 3rd honeymoon, so now it was just Mario himself, dressed up in his yellow helmet and holding his magical maker hammer for the crowds to see. Mario was a man of few words. He was not someone who got intensely involved in political affairs, nor was he someone who went out of his way to be a hero, not unless requested. This was one of the exceptions. Shroom City had been his home for many years, since he moved to the Mushroom Kingdom shortly after that fateful day he was discharged from the service. Luigi never knew of the war. He never had to, thanks to people like Mario. But after everything he went through in those jungles, after the fabled Mario's Bombs Away event, Mario found himself disconnected from everyone who had failed to face the horrors that the world presented those who looked deep enough. War would come to Shroom City if he did not fix things. The biggest city in the world, but one with no military, no defenses, no allies. It needed money for those things, and money was soon leaving. Thus came the Mario Maker contest. Mario's final effort to bring economic progress to Shroom City was to build it the infrastructure that it truly deserved. To bring public transportation to the city in a way that would help the poor, that would bring more jobs to communities. He would build stages that would act as tourist attractions, elaborate art pieces. He would make Shroom City great again. And he would do it with love. The rules of the contest were simple. 10 gifted inventors and builders invited from all over the planet Earth would gather, and would try to build the best courses within the allotted time period. The theme was urban landscapes, but it was not a strict one. If they built riverfront walkways filled with coins and power-ups, that was good. But if they built a brand new course on that river and filled it with dangerous enemies, that was also okay. Anything to help Shroom City. That was what Mario cared about. In fact, Shroom City was all that he could even think about once he saw Bowsette enter the stadium, minutes before the contest was supposed to begin. Shroom City was the only thing on his mind, even as he was tossed 50 feet in the air and his maker hammer snatched from his hands from none other than Peach herself. The fate of his home rested in the balance. And yet, he was passing out from a concussion.
Ka 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 ka.
Bowsette laughed.
Tee-hee.
Peach laughed with her. The two fearsome villainesses had stolen Mario's maker hammer and the poor sap in front of an audience of thousands. Empress Bowsette of Clan Koopa, dressed up in a white suit with a dazzling top hat, held in her free hand her wife, the glorious Lady Consort Toadstool, who wore her Shadow Queen dress, complete with grey makeup and extra long and pointy fake fingernails. And the audience cheered like it was the ultimate wrestling match.
Now, we have access to the most powerful weapon in the world,
Bowsette shouted.
We can make whatever courses we want, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. Yeah, we're like, evil and stuff,
added Peach.
Now, what to make?
Bowsette was no mere queen of terror, controller of Champaya, not any longer. She slipped on Mario's yellow hat, and she officially deemed herself Bowsette, the Maker. She held the hammer high in her hands.
I'm gonna spawn 50 Magi Koopas, and there's nothing you can do about it.
How did she, How does it work? Suddenly, Mario jumped back to consciousness, hatless, and pointed Bowsette down.
Well, I'll just curse you by throwing blocks on your head or whatever,
she said. She pointed the hammer slightly above Mario, and nothing.
Why the heck doesn't this hammer work?
Bowsette asked.
Why am I not conquering the world yet? You said we wouldn't conquer the world,
Peach said.
I mean hypothetically. You can't wield that hammer,
Mario says.
Because the hammer is not the power. The true power of a builder comes from within. No hammers can change that. You are not a maker.
Bowsette, at these words, broke down in sobs. The audience erupted into uproarious cheers. The Mario Maker contest continued, and Peach came in 8th place. Mario himself came in 3rd, with Pen Krieger taking the ultimate prize. But Bowsette could never qualify. She was not a maker. Only a destroyer.
Meh, that's okay. I like destroying things,
she said to herself. And so she spent the next hour destroying all the newly built courses to blow off steam. It was really fun. End of chapter. Chapter 115, The Crypt of Skepticism. A creature stirred deep beneath the earth. He did not hear it, but felt it. Its very waking movements shook the ground in seismic tremors. It had laid dormant for ages. Eons, even. Now, after all this time, its dreams were ending, its body was waking. Its body was, in addition, very hungry. He would have trembled before the might of such a creature, were he a younger man. He would have shivered on instinct, would have run as fast as he could. But he had learned in his many decades that there was no point in being scared. Tomorrow was going to come. Every day, he felt it happening, the moving of the rocks, the tremors, and the shocks. Heaven only knew which way it was coming from, but he knew that tomorrow was going to come. Very soon. People all along the street stumbled over on their feet. They fell down and down and down. Pilots in the windy sky. Whoosh. He wondered why everyone acted like they did, why they kept going round and round and round. Every single television was always on. People in the lines listened for signs. High up on the hills, he heard the beating drums. Tomorrow was going to come. And when it came, he would be there with his open arms. When he felt it, he knew it couldn't do him harm. Rumble. So when the world he knew was gone, he would be moving on. He would change. Every single day, he felt it happening. The rumbling refused to cease. The future refused to change. But he felt nothing. When the beast burst from the ground, when the crypt unsealed itself and let loose its cursed past, he still felt nothing. For the earth was already gone. And he would be moving on. A gigantic monster, 10 times bigger than Peach's castle, 10 times louder than a bonsai bill crashing into a mountain, roared out. It was less of a roar and more of a piercing, guttural screech. But he still felt nothing. He stroked his beard and prayed. Prayed that the machine would work after all these years. He inserted the skeleton key, turned it, and watched as the key's sad eyes blinked at it before fading away. The machine whirred on. It made creaking, janky noises, like it was going to break at any moment. It was supposed to be abandoned. This whole city was supposed to be abandoned after what happened. Toad Town was supposed to be naught but desert. Instead, thousands still lived here. And thousands who lived here would perish instantly when the machine activated. But that was the price paid for the ultimate warning. In a flash, everything was gone, including Captain Toad himself. He did not feel sad. He did not feel anything. He only hoped that the machine had gone to the past, that his message would be received by those who needed it most. But, as his body disintegrated and his bones atomized, the final thought in his mortal mind was an inkling of doubt. Those who needed the message most were also the most likely to ignore it. The machine had doomed the present, that much was certain. But if it doomed the past as well? He couldn't finish the thought, because he was already gone. End of chapter. Chapter 116, The Crypt of Skepticism, 2. A great battle was underway. It was happening all over again. Beings of all races, all creeds, all colors faced each other in some of the most intense combat there ever was. Koopa against Koopa. Human against human. Bob-omb against Bob-omb. For all of the glory that was being wrought, it was a time of great terror as well. The sheer carnage of kicked shells, of chomped chains, of bobs bombed. No living being could look upon such a scene and feel good about it. In fact, most would not be able to summon the courage needed to attempt to look. This was the scene of the Great Dark Land battle. Bowsette, Lordess of House Toadstool, mighty general of the Grand Unity Army on one side. Morton Koopa Sr., the fearsome foe of 1,000 generations on the other. It was a battle between titans. A duel between celestial dragons that would result in the fate of the entire Earth. It would be a day long remembered. The Mushroom Kingdom gone, Bowser's Kingdom dismantled. The fallen women and men on all sides. the face of the planet would change forever. Heroes would be made. Thwomp King, Flutter, Princess Toadstool, Iggy. And in return, villains would be made as well. King Bob-omb. Mad Science Stein. Morton himself, of course. But for now, the battle was currently raging in the most glorious of times that history could deliver. And then, in the middle of it all, a machine appeared. It did not make any bright flashes or dazzling portals. Instead, it simply appeared. One moment there was dark grass in a plain singed with fire and blood. The next moment, there was a large machine sitting on top of that grass, atop that fire and that blood. In front of that machine was one person who had joined in on the fighting. Toadiko. Toadette's ex-girlfriend. Princess Toadstool's childhood friend and a former cook in the employ of the Mushroom Kingdom's Royal Bakery Brigade. She had been swept up in the chaos of these last few years since Bowsette appeared on the scene and wreaked havoc on the Earth. After the turmoil of Toadsworth's betrayal, after the fall of the Crystal King, after the rebellion of the Dry Republic, so much of the world had changed in a complete and non-reversible way. Toadiko was barely involved in any of that. She was just a simple woman minding a simple life. And for some reason, that had led her here. Toadiko had joined her friend in this ultimate fight. She had devoted herself to facing the trials and tribulations of liberating Dark Land from the clutches of Morton Koopa, even if she didn't understand any of it. Even if it was so far beyond her scope of knowledge that it felt like a dream to be on the battlefield at this very moment. So Toadiko became a Knight of Toadstool just like everyone else. She hacked a mini thwomp in half with her mace and saw the machine. An eerie sense of curiosity overcame her. What in the world was something like this doing in the middle of a battlefield? How did something like this get here? What was it? As she approached, that eerie sense heightened. It was like the machine was calling specifically to her. She reached out her hand and just kind of. The screen turned on. A hologram of an elderly, decrepit, scarred male toad stared her in the eyes.
My name is Captain Toad,
the man in the hologram said.
Whoever you are receiving this, I must warn you. I must give you as much information as I can deliver. Please listen to what I have to say.
Yes, Toadiko said.
What do?
It was merely a recording, so it interrupted her, saying,
The universe is in danger. It was always in danger, that is. The Earth has been destroyed. We are nothing but a ruin in a dying cosmos, all thanks to her. Everything she wrought has brought to us every terror against which we always fought. I never thought. Listen. She's a blot on our existence. A hero she is not. WH.
What? Toadiko was so confused. What was going on? The message then delivered its final lines, and everything changed.
You must find the Lordess Bowsette and kill her. If she is not stopped now, then the universe will end up like it is now, here, for me, in my time. To save us all, you must kill her. Please tell no one what you are planning. And certainly do not tell them why. You, whoever you are our final hope.
Me? Toadiko asked the recording.
Yes, you.
Captain Toad lowered his head.
My time is gone. It is up to you.
The recording finished. And then the machine crumbled into dust. Todiko found herself alone. The armies had long since moved on from this sector, continuing their battle elsewhere. It was just Todiko, the dust of this machine, and the carnage of war on the ground around her. She couldn't help but cry, but she didn't know why.